It is the fourth model of the 2023 ZOIDS collaboration, not to be confused with ZOIDS Wild Zero. It is ZID03 G-Saurer, with a kit of Ghost Shot, Double Cross Shock, Wheeled Legs, and the leg ability of Bloodstain, which buffs power when attacking and your attack breaks apart on your enemy. Now, as the fourth model introduced in the collaboration, it's pretty much expected at this point that collab equals overpowered, and G-Saurer is most certainly no exception to this. But, given his particular kit and loadout, it does look like he does actually manage to kind of curb himself and kind of round himself in a way that, despite having rather powerful attacks, can be relatively easily countered or curb stomped depending on what kind of team you bring up with. Ghost Shot on his head part, and only a single use at that, is a very high power shooting part with passive defense ignore and pierce damage on top of that. But in contrast to, say, laser or hyper beam, that gets threshold damage bonuses, Ghost and Ghost Shot basically get damage bonuses relative to the amount of charge you have in your gauge by percent. So of course, at a low charge, you'll still be hitting relatively hard, but not quite as hard as you could. Whereas if you had use of it with full charge or something or with a full Metaforce charge, you absolutely will be laying death, waste, and destruction to anything in your wake. Of course, at the only cost that you are both unable to dodge or defend while you're in cooldown. Plus, given that he only has one use, it's something you're going to want to pay extra close attention to and make sure that you don't waste it early on. Cross Shock on both arms is a relatively new melee skill that we've seen spiking around here and there fairly recently, but it's still been making a lot of rounds in very high competitive meta for how viable and powerful it is. But, simply explained, Cross Shock is a scattered AoE attack, meaning it will damage one part normally and then two others at random at 1/3 damage. But here's the catch. In contrast to regular Claw or Gatling or Napalm, which is just basic AoE damage, Cross Shock guarantees landing the hit. It's always going to land no matter what, and every hit is a critical hit on top of that. So even if it is a scattered AoE type of attack, Cross Shock is a skill that's going to be very moderately painful no matter how you hit or where you hit, or even if the blow is directed by a shielder or someone using Conceal. In addition to this, is no real drawback to using Cross Shock either, aside from being just ever so slightly open to punish, but of course if you are fast enough on the field or have a defender on the team, this can be relatively easily curbed. Wheeled Legs means that G-Saurer has relatively high base mobility at the cost of being very, very picky on the terrains that he's on. And that means that he only has, say, 2 terrains at best where he's really good on. One of them is of course Cyber terrain, which everybody gets S rank on. And even despite having very high base power between all 3 of his parts, almost 2400 for Ghost Shot, about 1850 for the right arm Cross Shock, almost 2100 for the left, and a base mobility of 931 is kind of par for the course when it comes to Wheeled Legs. The resist stats as well are kind of a big pain point for him, just as it is with his mobility. And his evade is a little over 1400 is really nice though, as it does mean he will have a fairly decent time dodging or grazing incoming blows. But a melee resist of 970 and a shoot resist of 940, it's not terrible. It's kind of in that middle ground zone where you really want to stay no lower than if you want to keep even just some passable or even decent at best reduction stats across the board, which I think does kind of serve as a way to kind of round G-Saurer out so he's not completely broken no matter which part you use, pure set or mixed. Plus, Bloodstain does actually kind of pair very nicely with its very feral and destructive nature, as it does mean that for every part he breaks when attacking enemies, his damage will go up just a little bit more. So if you were to pair that with, say, a Hunter or Sniper nature medal, where every time you break something you also get Metaforce charge, a couple of uses of Cross Shock, and then finish off with Ghost Shot will be a very good way to make use of that strategy. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I still do have to rate him a pretty well-rounded 7 out of 10 across the board. He does have some very good base power behind that, and that's also not including any crits that he will land based on Cross Shock, and his armor is relatively chunky too, with his head HP of about 4250, right arm at about 3,000, left arm at about 3,600, and his legs at about 4,250 as well, means he does have a very healthy HP pool about him. Just be very careful with that right arm, as it does mean he will kind of have a glassy right hook, essentially, if you are going to use the right arm cross shock. But of course, with it also being a non-heavy part, I guess that would kind of round it out to a point. But the only real weakness of G-Saurer as well is the fact that he is wheel-legged, which means, again, his terrain compatibility is going to be very poor, but on terrains he's good at, he dominates. Plus, like I mentioned, because Ghost Shot only has one use, exercise very high caution and make sure that you don't waste that one and only shot you have, because if you do, well, you're kind of down a part no matter what. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him just a little bit higher at a 7.5 out of 10, given that even though wheeled legs, I do feel is something that holds G-Saurer back, as well as only one use of Ghost Shot, as well as it being Ghost Shot on a head no less, which means it is a lot harder to make use of and capitalize on a full charge. Cross Shock is probably going to be the one part you're going to use on him the most after this collaboration ends, just because of how powerful and versatile of a skill it is. It's pretty much been that way ever since it was first revealed with Unit 02 from the EVA collab, and it's something that you're going to see immensely often in very high competitive teams for its high damage, its guaranteed crits, and the scattered damage on top of that it deals.